Hi everyone, it is your host Amalia Lee and welcome to another episode of Recovery Talk. I just realized that I don't know if I've ever really said my name on this podcast. Maybe I have, but I just realized probably be a good chunk of people who had no idea my name is actually Amalia rather than Emily. Now you know. Anyways, the topic for today is thinking about, planning, fantasizing, daydreaming about recovery, but not doing anything about it. What is going on here? Why does it happen? And how can you get out of this loop? And also, why is it so important to get out of this loop? Before we get started, I want to make a very quick announcement that I know some of you have been waiting for. And that is that I am finally reopening my one-on-one coaching slots. It's been closed for a long time just because I have had to go through my waitlist and then I closed my waitlist so people weren't waiting. So I've just completely closed all intakes until now. I do have limited availability. Currently, my availability is morning, Monday to Wednesday UK time, and afternoon, Thursday to Friday UK time. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, head over to letsrecover.co.uk or you can click the links in my bio. I have one link that takes me to my website, letsrecover.co.uk, and another link that takes you straight to the coaching form. Please note that I'm recording this in October 2024, so if you're listening to this in the future, there is a chance that A, I won't have coaching spaces available anymore, and B, the link is not in the bio anymore because I may have changed the coaching forms. But my website, letsrecover.co.uk, should still be up and running, and there you can always click and learn more about coaching and see what is available. I also have some wonderful coaching colleagues at letsrecover.co.uk that offer one-on-one coaching and may also have a bit more flexibility in terms of time and availability, and also in terms of fees and in terms of language as well, because we're all from different countries. So as for now, you can get coaching in Norwegian from me, or German, or English, of course, and also in Dutch. So yeah, link in episode description or just head over to letsrecover.co.uk. Now let's get into the episode. So I very rarely meet someone with an eating disorder who is not fantasizing about being recovered and what their recovered life could look like. Yes, there occasionally are people who are, especially if they're very stuck in eating disorder or very depressed, may not be able to really picture that optimistic future. But most of the time, if you ask someone with an eating disorder, like, do you plan on living like this for the rest of your life? They usually say no. They may struggle believing that it's possible to live a different way, but a lot of times there's hope there. And that is incredibly precious. And that's very important for me to get forward, that having hope for a better future is essential. And yes, hope is something that will typically wax and wane throughout recovery. It may have days where you are very hopeful and other days where it just feels like all hope is lost. But as long as there's something there, some kind of fighting spirit, you're on the right track. So I want to say that having hope and being able to envision a better future is good, actually. So I am a huge daydreamer, and I remember when I was in my own recovery, what kept me going was the idea of a better future. The idea that I could do things, I could become a different version of me, a recovered version of me. That really helped me move forward. And this is an important distinction here when we talk about like planning recovery, fantasizing about recovery, daydreaming about recovery. When is it good? When is it bad? And I would say instead of making it seem like daydreaming is good or bad, I would see like, is it productive and take you forward? Or is it something that ends up holding you back? And now people may wonder, well, how can daydreaming about recovery or fantasizing about recovery or planning and strategizing around that future moment when you may do recovery be a bad thing? And here's the thing. It becomes a bad thing or a not so productive thing when it actually holds you back from acting or becomes a replacement for acting. There is this thing called maladaptive daydreaming. It's essentially a term that was coined by a psychology professor, referring to when your daydreaming becomes so excessive that it actually takes you out of real life, and it becomes a coping mechanism that isolates you, prevents you from action, rather than something that takes you forward and connects you with the people around you. At its most extreme, maladaptive daydreaming is typically something we see more in people who've experienced trauma. We also can see it more sometimes in people with obsessive compulsive disorder. And in the latter case, it may move over more to rumination territory, right? Where you're just like, you're not reflecting, you're ruminating. Big difference. And what's the difference between rumination and reflection? Well, again, same thing. Is it taking you forward? Is it making you change your actions for the better to get to where you want to be? Healthy self-reflection is like, okay, that thing I didn't really work out. Let me try something different. Healthy self-reflection is knowing your tendencies so that you are moving in a direction that is right for you. Rumination is being stuck in a thought loop where you're just going around and round in circles. There may be a lot of self-loathing as well, like, how could you be so silly? How did you mess this up? It's just that almost like you're beating yourself. So when it comes about daydreaming about the future, fantasizing about something, that is actually something on a neurological level that gives you happy hormones, happy chemicals. So you're essentially getting the reward from an action without doing anything. You may have noticed this when you have a plan and you talk about the plan to someone, and it feels so fun and good to talk about the plan with someone, but then you notice that immediately you don't want to do the thing anymore. I'm not sure if you had that. I definitely have myself. And that's why when I plan something, I always try to be a little bit careful with not talking too much about it with other people, so that I instead get the reward from the action rather than talking or thinking about the action. Because why would you do recovery if you can get a little boost and reward from thinking about hypothetically recovering at a future point? Because then you can get the fantasy, but then you don't have to go through the distress and discomfort of actually going through recovery and doing the hard work. And your brain is really primitive in that way, because your brain is always looking for like the easiest solution. Like it is looking for the shortcuts. But the truth is, with recovery, there are no shortcuts. You're going to have to go through it, not around it. There is no like magical tricks where suddenly it becomes easy. And if anything, if there was a magic button you could press that made recovery smooth and easy and predictable and everything going after plan, that wouldn't have been a good button to push, because you wouldn't learn anything from it. And recovery is such a good chance for self-development, but you learn from doing and from, yes, making mistakes and yes, things being hard. That's how you learn. And I'm saying this because so many people, they spend so much time strategizing around recovery, and they think they need to know everything. They think everything needs to be perfect. You can't know everything. I've been now in the field and area of eating disorders for over a decade, pretty much my entire adult life. And I still don't know everything. I am still learning so much every day. And I'm someone who does a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of learning. And I just feel like the more I learn, the more I realize that there are so many things I don't know. So how could you expect yourself to know everything when even people who are working in the field, even people who are way older than me, have done this way longer than me, will say the same thing? We don't know everything. We are always learning. Because as you have learned everything, there will come something new out, right? We will have new discoveries. It's impossible to know everything. So don't set yourself up for failure by thinking you need to know everything about recovery to do recovery. And yes, please don't get me wrong. Knowing about recovery, understanding a bit what's going on can be incredibly helpful. I know for myself that was something that really helped me push through, especially when I was in recovery and I was experiencing all of these weird things that nobody spoke about, and actually learning that, yeah, this is a thing, was incredibly valuable for me. And that's also what I'm trying to do with this podcast. I'm trying to take that information, make it into quote unquote common knowledge for people who are going through recovery. But you don't need to know all of that, because also you learn from facing it and then being like, oh, what is this thing? And then figuring it out. Because you can prepare yourself all you like, but there will still be surprises. And that's a good thing. I know your brain probably at this point don't want to hear that, but It's just so much better to be prepared that, yeah, things will go wrong, there may be surprises, and see that as part of the journey rather than a hindrance for the journey to happen. I see this so often with clients where they start out and they have like a rough idea in their head, like, this is what I think is going to be a huge challenge for me. And this other thing I think is going to be really easy for me. And then as they start recovering, they realize that that thing that they thought was going to be super difficult actually turned out to be pretty easy. And that thing that they thought was going to be pretty easy actually turned out, whoa, that was actually quite challenging. And the thing is that you can't really strategize around these things. Yes, having like a baseline knowledge of where you're at, of your tendencies, can be very helpful. For example, if you know that you're someone who have a tendency towards excessive compulsive movement, planning and strategizing around that and be prepared, definitely a very reasonable and helpful thing. But you can't always plan and strategize and predict everything, and that's okay. Having a very rough plan when going into recovery can be helpful, but like I always say, you don't need to see the whole staircase to take the first step. Instead, focus on having a supportive team around you that can help you guide as you are walking on this path. Someone who can tell you that, you know what, we will cross that bridge when we get to it. What is my set point? How do I know if I'm eating enough? How would it be to go off my meal plan? When should I go back into movement? How can I do that without relapsing? We will cross that bridge when we get to it. If you asked me in early recovery, so how is intuitive eating going to be for you? How are you going to do that? I would have had no answer. And if I felt like I had to have an answer to that in order to start recovery, I would never have started. Instead, I took that first step of the staircase, knowing that I have no idea how I'm actually going to get up this staircase, but I'm going to start walking. And as I went there, step by step, eventually things became easier, things became doable. Those things that I thought was going to be so hard, yeah, it could be challenging, but things were actually manageable and I was capable. I had never thought I was. I had all of these reasons why recovery was possible for everyone else but me. I was just fundamentally broken. I was an emotional eater. I was not sick enough, but also simultaneously somehow too sick, so it wouldn't really work for me. Like all of these things in my head. And here I am, been recovered for over a decade. And I didn't get here by knowing everything in advance. I got here by doing and learning from doing. So a bit earlier in this episode, I mentioned that if you ask a person with an eating disorder if they imagine spending the rest of their lives like that, they usually say no. Or at least if you ask them, do you want to spend your life like that? They very rarely say, yeah, this is such an awesome situation to be in. I love it. 10 out of 10 would really recommend. You don't hear that. Bad reviews all across the board here. Of course, ambivalence is expected because you literally have a mental health condition that's telling you, I'm not really here, but also don't get rid of me. You can never be happy without me. But still, people with eating disorders usually, they tend to want recovery. Not always, but a lot of the time, at least part of them tend to want recovery, or at least wanting something different than where they currently are at. And you see this when people with eating disorders often go to great lengths to seek out recovery, often to a great financial cost, a great logistic cost, a great time cost. Yet there is that part that is like, no, it's actually so evil, because it's like recovery is your biggest fear and your biggest wish a lot of the time. Or it may go from one to the other and like flip back and forth like a ping pong. So because so many people with eating disorders really want recovery, but they're really scared of the action, I think this creates a little bit of a cognitive dissonance. And a bit of a situation where if they are researching recovery, if they're strategizing, if they're planning, if they are picturing a recovered future, then they feel like, well, I'm doing something. They may go see a therapist, for example, or a coach or a dietitian, but not really engage with the treatment. But they are like, well, I'm doing something. See, I'm seeing a therapist. I'm doing it. So that you can tell yourself and those around you that, but I am working on this thing. But you know deep within that you're not really doing the work that needs to be done. And this is the thing. The magic is in that work that you are desperately avoiding. The things you don't want to do, that's what you need to do. For a lot of people, simply just admitting like, yeah, I just have an eating disorder at this point. I'm not in recovery. I'm not taking steps towards recovery. that is just too hard for people. They need to feel like they're doing something, because then they can kind of tick off that box of working on it. But there is a difference between being in recovery from an eating disorder and having an eating disorder. And I think sometimes people confuse the two, which I don't actually think is helpful for people with eating disorders. If you are having an eating disorder, but you are technically going and talking a little bit with the therapist once every 2 weeks, are you really in recovery from an eating disorder? Is things happening? Are you progressing forward? Are you taking action rather than just talking? And please don't get me wrong, I do not want to cast judgment onto other people's recoveries or how they define it. I understand different people may have different definitions. And for some people, maybe just talking about recovery or just thinking a bit about it may for them be the first step. That at least I know was the case for me. It was a point where I was like, hey, maybe there is a different way. And I started thinking and considering it. Started kind of like, okay, I'm going to agree. I'm going to go see the psychologist. So I started in that way. But it's important to say that that was a time-limited period that then took me towards action. So yeah, I was planning and strategizing around recovery, even fantasizing a bit on, oh, how could it be to be recovered? Those are there are things that I want to do if I'm recovered. That would be so fun, and like getting a bit excited about it. But it would have been a problem if I was stuck there. It would have been a problem if 10 years later I was still just thinking one day, one day, one day. Because all we really have is the current moment. We are not living in the past or in the future. We are living in the here and now. And life is something that happens to us whilst we are kind of waiting for life to happen. You know, a lot of times people say, well, when this happens, I'll start living. When that happens, I'll start living. And it becomes like a bit of a band-aid to why they're not feeling happy with their current life. And some of this may be helpful even in recovery. For example, being able to think, well, I'm in recovery now, things are hard, things are painful and scary, but I'm doing this so that at a future point, I will be calmer and things will be better and easier. So I don't think like fantasizing about the future as a way to pull through is necessarily always a bad thing. In recovery, like I said, can be very, very helpful and productive. But if it becomes something that prevents you from taking action, becomes a replacement for doing, then I would say it's maladaptive. And remember, an eating disorder is always going to try to stay overdue. It's always going to try to prolong the time till you get rid of it. Or it's going to try, if you're trying to get rid of it, it's going to try and be like, oh yeah, can I hold on a little bit, right? It's like a parasite. It's always going to try to like take over its host. It's like a guest that don't want to leave, even though you keep being like, hey, here's the door, can you go out? It's like, no, actually, I need to stay a bit longer, right? That is an eating disorder. So, of course, the eating disorder is going to be on board with endlessly daydreaming about, fantasizing about recovery, but not really doing anything. That's like the ideal situation. Anything that prevents you or postpones action is what the eating disorder wants. And there is no perfect time to recover. There's no perfect moment. There is no magical moment where you just feel ready. It's something that you become ready by doing. I think this is like one of my most repeated things in this entire podcast, that there is no magic moment, and that my light bulb moment was realizing there was no light bulb moment. But it's one of the most important messages I want to get forward to people, because this is where I tend to see most people being very stuck. Is that they are postponing, they're waiting, and they think there will be like this something coming above them, some like reality check that will just magically make them recover. And yes, some people do recover after there is some kind of reality check, some kind of major life situation that means that they, almost like shocks them into action. But a lot of times this actually doesn't happen. A lot of times people go through things that they would thought in the past would be a quote unquote reality check, but it actually is just something the eating disorder holds on to. For example, they may think that if their partner leaves them due to the eating disorder souring the relationship, that would be a massive reality check that would make them want to change. But actually instead, the eating disorder tries to be like, hey, you really need me now because you just went through something hard and you need to go back to your old coping mechanisms. Or they may think that if they have some kind of medical event, for example, maybe they broke their leg due to osteopenia, osteoporosis, they may think that is going to be one of those things that makes them finally feel sick enough to deserve recovery. But then actually the eating disorder starts throwing a tantrum over the fact that they need to rest their leg and starts being like, oh, you need to restrict now. So please stop waiting for magical future moments or some kind of major thing to happen before you take action. It's not really going to work. So if you're someone who is stuck in this daydreaming, planning, fantasizing, strategizing recovery, what do? Well, I think for a lot of people, this is probably a time to seek out some form of support, something that can help keep you accountable. So if you're just thinking about increasing your intake, maybe instead seek out an eating disorder dietitian where you can actually make a plan together, and that dietitian can help keep you accountable session by session. A lot of times making an agreement with someone else, especially a treatment professional, can be very helpful. But what is important is that you find a treatment professional that is actually willing and able to keep you accountable, rather than someone that is very happy with just coming, having a chat, and nothing happening. If you're going to therapy, it could be worth thinking about a therapy that is a bit more action-oriented. For example, some forms of cognitive behavioral therapy may be suitable for this, acceptance commitment therapy, solution-oriented therapy, or something like coaching. At the end of the day, what matters is that it is someone that you can collaborate with, someone who believes in your ability to change, and someone who can keep you accountable. Just because you know what to do doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do it. And I think this is part why people just keep looking for knowledge, because they're like, oh yeah, but I don't know really what to do. So they think they just need to learn more about what to do in order to act. And again, like I said, sometimes it can be very helpful to have knowledge. But if you are just, maybe you spent years just reading about recovery, thinking about recovery, probably not a lack of knowledge that's going on. A lot of times I see people with eating disorders who could probably write a whole book about eating disorder recovery, but they're just not applying it to themselves. And in those cases, maybe the solution is not more learning and reading and thinking about doing. Maybe it would be more taking specific actions, finding someone that can help keep you accountable, and actually setting goals and having tasks and having something to do and work with. I also think you are going to have to be radically honest with yourself, because a lot of times these patterns that I'm talking about, like strategizing, daydreaming, etc., there is a slight hint of denial, a slight hint of, oh, but I'm doing something. So I think here it's very important to be honest with yourself and be like, no, I am postponing recovery. I am preventing action. I am using a bunch of strategies to make me feel like I'm doing something, but I'm not actually doing something. And that is something I am going to have to take active measures to change. I think a huge part of this is also your willingness to accept discomfort and to accept temporarily that things may get a bit harder before they get easier. And so many times I see people with eating disorders who are incredibly resilient people. They are able to push through and to do things that make them uncomfortable in every other arena, but somehow find it hard to apply that to eating disorder recovery. So I want you to think a bit about a time in your life where you did something that was very hard in the moment, but that gave you a result later on. Maybe you were studying hard for an exam and it was really boring and you didn't want to do it, but then you got good grades. Or maybe you went through a crushing breakup and you were like, oh my goodness, it's never going to get better. I'm going to miss my ex forever and ever. I'm never going to find someone else. And then you went through it and things did get easier. And then suddenly you look at your ex and you're like, what was I thinking? This is how the eating disorder is going to look for you when you've recovered. It's going to be that thing of, nope. You suddenly see so much in hindsight of how toxic the eating disorder was. Even though the eating disorder may try and romanticize itself at times, you will start getting more of a clearer view. And if you're someone who maybe haven't been able to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you have been quite isolated from the world, been quite sheltered, been just very much in your comfort zone, you can also start challenging that in very small ways. And I'm not necessarily talking about recovery here, but I'm talking more about just gradually putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, also in areas outside of recovery. And when it comes to recovery, you may actually use recovery as a chance to get yourself out of your comfort zone. It can be something for you to prove to yourself that you are able to tolerate distress and discomfort. Because the very brutal truth is that your success in life, and when I say success, I don't necessarily mean like making a bunch of money or being very famous. I'm talking about doing things that are meaningful to you. Your success in that is probably going to depend on you increasing your discomfort tolerance. Someone who doesn't tolerate any discomfort, they don't tolerate any kind of doing something a bit outside of their comfort zone, they probably aren't going to live the most happy, fulfilling life. But the good news is that this is not an ingrained thing. Yes, we all have different tendencies and predispositions, but it is something where you can work on expanding your comfort zone. And that can mean something else for very different people. For some people, expanding their comfort zone may just be saying hi to the barista at the cafe. Whilst for others, it can mean moving to a different country and starting fresh and learning a new language, right? It can mean different things for different people. But please be mindful of not falling into the trap of just intellectualizing recovery over and over. Intellectualizing your feelings or intellectualizing recovery in general is a way to avoid actually feeling the feelings and actually doing the things. So be honest with yourself about that. And if you are in treatment, be honest with your practitioners about that, because that also helps them help you. Yes, a good practitioner is someone that should push you, but a lot of times they also go a bit with what you express that you want to work on. So if you're not telling them like, hey, I want to work on recovery, they may not necessarily bring that up or push that, right? Doesn't immediately make them a useless practitioner. It just means that they may work in a bit of a different way. So take some self-accountability and self-responsibility as well here. Because even though support is incredibly important and can really be life-changing and get you in the right direction, it is at the end of the day something that's going to have to come from you, and the work is going to have to be done by you. Trust me, it is going to be worth it in the end. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please rate this podcast. And also feel free to follow me on Instagram at Amalia Lee or letsrecover.co.uk. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, you can head over to my website, letsrecover.co.uk, if you are interested in coaching. And I may have some other things coming up in the future, potentially some group coaching or webinars or courses. Have a few things in the planning, but I don't want to announce anything just yet. But keep an eye on it, Have a lovely day and week ahead, guys, and I will see you in the next episode.